Welcome to Potter Revisited, episode 57. I'm Tori.
And I'm Shay.
Today we are covering chapter 20 of Prisoner of Azkaban, The Dementor's Kiss.
Or, as we like to call it,
Pucker up for your lobotomy. So at the end of last chapter, we leave off with, the trio knocking Snape out cold, them believing Sirius and Remus about who betrayed Harry's parents, and of course the reveal that Scabbers was Peter Pettigrew this whole time.
And now they're the weirdest group of people, semi-unconscious, walking out of a hole in the ground under a weeping willow.
What a sight, what a sight. So one of the first things Sirius does when they're kind of out of the Whomping Willow is he's just kind of like, hey, Harry, I'm your godfather. Would you like to live with me? And of course, we talked about this a lot, but kind of like, if Sirius was freed and able to have Harry live with them, what would Dumbledore have to do? Because that's not a part of Dumbledore's plan.
He would definitely make sure Sirius is so busy doing tasks for the Order that he didn't have time or the ability to take care of Harry. He would probably, if he had to, expressly forbid it, and everyone just listens to Dumbledore all the time, which is dumb, but how it seems to work.
I feel like he'd have to explain how Lily's
magic,
affects where Harry lives, so he has to date the Dursleys. And I feel like Sirius would get that, but also Sirius is a lot more attentive than the Dursleys, so he's gonna be wanting to check out things and stuff, and Dumbledore's just ugh.
Yeah, I think Sirius would 100% just not stand for it actually, frankly, he would kill Dumbledore if he found out how horrendously Harry had been neglected and abused by the Dursleys and how Dumbledore had stood by letting it happen, knowing what was going on. I don't think Sirius would stand for that.
I feel like out of everyone, Sirius is kind of a wild card when it comes to Dumbledore, because we have Remus and Hagrid and everyone who just worships Dumbledore, always trusts Dumbledore kind of blindly. But Sirius, he obviously respects Dumbledore, but also he does what he wants.
Yeah, he is a creature of chaos.
We see kind of in Order of the Phoenix that Sirius does what Sirius wants and doesn't really care what Dumbledore has to say.
I think he's impulsive enough to do something against Dumbledore out of pure anger for what Harry's been put through. And if he took the time to think it through, he'd realize there are too many political and social repercussions to doing anything that would displease Dumbledore, but he wouldn't take the time to think it through. So I think he is more likely to actually do something directly against Dumbledore's orders.
I like that you bolded Sirius would kill Dumbledore.
He would absolutely. I mean, he would. He would not. He would kill Dumbledore and the Dursleys, I think. There's a good, I'm not saying it's impossible. He's a bit deranged. So.
Yeah, I mean, Sirius is a wild card.
And he has a very skewed sense of justice. Vengeance. He doesn't have a sense of justice. He has a sense of vengeance.
Gotta love Sirius and his chaotic self. But Harry's first reaction to this is, when can I move in?
Yeah.
Which I get it's kind of funny, but also
heartbreaking.
Yeah, this kid's just kind of I can leave the Dursleys, these awful people I've been stuck with and abused by 12, 13 years. Pack my bags now, let's go. Doesn't even know where Sirius has a house or anything.
I think Harry would really love living with Sirius, but I think there would be a lot of negative repercussions. I think if Harry lived with Sirius, he would definitely become all aid. There would be no ego or super ego involved at all. I feel like he would develop a constant desire for instant gratification, and he would really just learn to never think through his choices or consider consequences, because that's what Sirius would model for him. I think he would stay up way too late. I think he would eat all the candy. I think he would never brush his teeth. He would likely end up with a regrettable tattoo and a lot of cavities.
I was going to say, he'd probably show up for fourth year with a few tattoos. I never think of Sirius just raising or living with Harry with just him. I feel like he needs another adult presence like Lupin.
Yeah, I do not think Sirius actually counts as responsible adult supervision. That's what it comes down to. It would be way better for Harry. I'd rather him be with an irresponsible Sirius than abused by the Dursleys, but it still isn't the ideal circumstance.
Yeah. One thing is, though, that Harry's only known Sirius for a few hours, in person, for this whole conversation happening. And for most of that, he thought Sirius was a murderer. And so he very quickly is just kind of you know what? Yes, I'll live with you. don't really know you or anything about you, but yeah,
I mean, the character reviews for Sirius are a lot better than what Harry would review the Dursleys as. Like, Lupin clearly thinks Sirius is a great guy, and his dad really liked Sirius. So, like, Sirius has glowing reviews in Harry's book.
Harry's just so trusting, and I'm just gonna be like, yeah, like I believe you that you're not like, a serial killer trying to kill me, but like I think we need to have a few coffee, get to know you sessions before I like pack my bags.
Yeah, like, we don't know if Sirius can cook. Like, what would Harry eat if he lived with Sirius? We don't know yet.
Does he smoke in the house? Does he snore?
Oh my god, that would be the worst.
Like things you should know.
And like, Petunia keeps a pretty tidy house, and I feel like Hogwarts is fairly tidy as well. So like, Harry probably has a pretty high threshold for what tidy is, and I feel like mostly abandoned house that hasn't been attended to except by one grumpy house elf since Sirius has been in prison, paired with basically the mentality of a 21-year-old frat boy, does not necessarily lead to a tidy home. And I feel like there'll be grime on the toilet that Harry is not used to or comfortable with.
These are the things you should be asking, but of course Harry's just like, get me out of the Dursleys.
Yeah. He's 13. He's like, I'll go anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, so when Harry kind of was like, when can I move in? Sirius like has this like big grin, and Harry kind of like describes this image of him, how he looks a bit like 10 years younger and happier, and just like he can see the resemblance to the man that was like in the picture at his parents' wedding, and I thought that was kind of sweet. And just kind of shows like how like haggard and just kind of like destroyed by like guilt Sirius has been, and like the toll it's taken on his face.
It's hard to keep up your skincare routine in prison, I would guess. I also think, yeah, well, Harry is thinking about how handsome Sirius is. They all seem to have forgotten the elephant, or dare I say, planet. Or no, I'd say celestial body. That's what I'm going with. They all seem to have forgotten the celestial body in the room, which is the goddamn moon. It's a full moon. They just decided to forget that key, very important factor. I'm not being an astrology girl about it. They've got a werewolf. The moon is the big deal.
They all just forgot about this big player in the story, which is the moon.
Snape would not have forgotten about the moon. I just need to put that up front.
Well, I mean, he was telling them about it before they knocked him out.
So, like, you have to give him a, not a sucks point, whatever the opposite of a Snape, like a all right, fine. Or a we would have been better off if he were conscious point.
I feel like Sirius would be dead by now if Snape hadn't been knocked out. But, other side of the the options. But it's something I really like how this is written, because when Lupin's in the process of transforming, he's described as like Lupin's like limbs are doing this, and it's just like very much saying like Lupin's doing this. But as soon as he's transformed, it's the werewolf's doing this, the werewolf is doing this. So it kind of shows like how his community and personality, his connection basically to Lupin is completely like there's no connection to it. He's now the werewolf.
Yeah, it's like completely separate parts of the brain. They're not conscious of each other. They don't know each other's around. And like, Lupin probably knows about what happens the next day when people tell him what werewolf Lupin did, but in no way does his like personality or who he is as a person have any sway on his behaviors when he's transformed.
Yeah, so Sirius tells the kids, to run, but Harry's kind of torn back because Ron's still like connected to Lupin and Pettigrew. So he's like, can't leave Ron. Oh yeah, and Ron also has like a broken foot or leg at this point still. So
they're like, well, Ron's gonna get eaten.
And also Snape's just like hanging out there. He doesn't tell Snape to run. Snape's just
unconscious. Like, leave Snape to get eaten by Lupin, and we'll all run for it.
Yeah. So Sirius goes after Lupin and tries to keep him safe, and Hermione was like, we should go get help. Of course, that's Hermione does.
Smart, logical Hermione thoughts.
Yeah, Harry's like, I gotta help Sirius. I don't know how he's gonna help him, but
I sure know 2 spells. Okay, 1.5 spells.
Harry always has the best intentions, but not really the skills to back it up. At least not this time.
Yeah. Again, he knows 1.5 spells.
Of course, like the one thing they walk into is, so they walk there to go see what happened to Sirius. And of course, they walk into like a swarm of Dementors.
Classic.
Just to make like this evening worse. But Harry's telling Hermione to think of happy memory and kind of teach her how to do like the Patronus charm. even though it's very hard. And Harry's happy memory is leaving the Dursleys, which I thought is also just, kick in the gut, because that's obviously not going to be happening.
Except that's not a happy memory either. It's a happy potential future option. So I feel like he's loopholing things in a way he probably shouldn't. I also think it's weird that like Hermione hasn't sort of learned the Patronus charm yet, because we know Harry learned it and we know Harry sort of did it in a Quidditch game so people saw it. And I can't imagine the Hermione we know and love seeing Harry do an interesting, cool bit of advanced magic and not immediately being like, what's the incantation? What's the wand movement? I'm learning it. This is so cool. Like,
That's true. I guess we don't know how Hermione like usually studies like their current textbooks, so I don't know. Maybe it's just because I think it's like a seventh year spell or something. So like maybe it's just like a bit too far away, and she's like, "Oh, I'm not ready for that yet."
if Harry can try and do a spell, Hermione can definitely try better.
Well, Harry needed it like out of necessity, and to Hermione, she's just like, oh, I'm doing other stuff. But because Harry's actually the one that teaches her too, so she doesn't even learn it after this. She doesn't learn it to Order of the Phoenix.
It's hard to believe that. I think that's like a plot, not a plot hole, but like a character development hole. Like that's not how Hermione would go about this.
The description of the Dementors, as they kind of swarm Sirius and even Harry and Hermione, it's really kind of creepy. It describes like the description of when the Dementors lower their hood and kind of like try and suck at your soul.
Yeah, it's the Dementors sound really terrifying. Specifically, the lack of eyes is something I find very unsettling.
Yeah.
I don't like anything to do with eyes, enucleation. It's not my scene. It's not my vibe. I want no part in it.
Exactly. But just like you had the decaying hand and just kind of like this weird like kind of rattling noise they make. Yeah, it's all very disturbing.
The rattling noise is a little bit like the ghost of Jacob Marley in like A Christmas Carol. I don't know why, but like that's kind of a different vibe to me than the rest of it. Everything is spooky, and then I'm thinking a Muppet Christmas Carol.
So, the Dementor's obviously going to give Harry the Dementor's kiss without authorization here. And I'm wondering if that's kind of foreshadowing to the fact like the Dementors aren't really ever in the Ministry's control. Just like right now, the Ministry gives them the ability to do what they want, but it's obvious when they switch to Voldemort's side because he can give them more of what they want. And like they just do what they want. They just do what they want.
I definitely think they bend the rules. Like they expand what they're allowed to do as much as they can. But I also wonder to what extent they were told what things they can do regarding capturing Sirius Black. Like if they were told, if you find Sirius Black, you immediately give him the Dementor's kiss. If anyone stands in the way of you doing so, they're an ally to Sirius Black, and you can also give them the kiss if it allows you to complete the task. Like the prioritization of civilians versus the prioritization of getting Sirius might be not what we would hope it to be, because governments are like this.
We do know that like Cornelius Fudge does say that like they really want Sirius Black because they're really mad that he escaped. So I could see why like they're just like
because it's a PR disaster.
Yeah, but I also think he's also surprised that they went after like the kids. So I feel like to them it's just kind of like, oh, they're here, whatever. But like I don't think they were ever instructed, and that's kind of like a red flag.
I also don't think they considered that kids would be helping Sirius. Like I feel like getting Sirius and capturing him and like maybe having another shady known criminal character also got the Dementor's kiss along the way is still perfectly fine and not a terrible PR thing. But if we get Sirius and some children got in the way and the Dementors also ate them, I think that's a different story. And I just think that like there's a big possibility that the people in government don't realize how much these kids get themselves involved in adult situations. So they're like, man, we kill a few adults, we get Sirius Black. It's a 50-50, it balances out. But like he was ill prepared for this.
I don't think the Dementors really have like a PR concern. I think they just like they want their people, and then like because they're usually only secluded to Azkaban.
It's not a PR move from the Dementors. It's a PR move from the government determining what they're comfortable with allowing or requesting the Dementors do.
I was just gonna say that like the Dementors like aren't used to having like people like Harry around, and so I feel like they can't resist. So they have like general rules that they're meant to follow, and they don't have anything better offered to them right now. So like fine, but I feel just they can't. They're not like meant to be controlled by humans, wizards or not.
Yeah, there's also a fan theory that the Dementors find Harry irresistible because he has extra soul to suck out because he
Oh,
has
yeah,
that
yeah,
piece of
yeah.
Voldemort. So it's kind of like if you're like, ooh, should I eat that thing that's not really mine? But then you find out it's your favorite flavor and it's extra double sized. You're like, oh, wait.
Don't mind if I do.
Not only is it the soul of a youthful, full of hope child, but it's also got another little piece of soul in there. So, like, it could be they were attracted to the extra piece of soul because they're like, it's totally worth getting in trouble. It's going to be extra filling. Or the alternative is they recognize that piece of soul as Voldemort, and they've been trained to know Voldemort is enemy. And so they're not like, oh, we're killing Harry Potter, this random child. They're like, oh, there's a piece of Voldemort in there. It's Voldemort. We'll kill this thing. Like the Horcrux plays a role, maybe.
I always took it as because Harry has so much misery in his past. That's why that he's so sensitive to them. That's also why they like him so much, is because he has all this delicious misery to, suck up. And so when he's there, they're like, this is just like dessert after Sirius. So you have some thoughts about.
Oh, I always have thoughts. First of all, why is it called the Dementor's kiss? Like, I get the imagery of it is like mouth to mouth, but it really didn't have to be that. There are other ways to make things creepy. And I just think calling it a kiss makes the whole thing kind of sound grossly intimate rather than like spooky. Like, why is it not the Dementor's face punch? Because the point of it is to hurt them. Or the Dementor's soul suck, because alliteration is fun. Or the Dementor's aggressive emotional kick to the spleen. The Dementors tell you they're disappointed in you and expected more from you in the tone similar to that of your mother. That hurts. I'm just saying it's an option.
I think it's kind of like the oxymoron being like, when you think of kiss, what you think is kind of intimate, consensual thing, and here it's like the opposite.
Ugh, I just think it's like, I don't love that choice. I don't love that choice. I guess the image, I understand, like, it evokes a certain imagery, like pucker up, time to die, almost base pucker up for your emotional romantic lobotomy. Basically, it's pucker up for your lobotomy, is what they're saying when they call it the Dementor's kiss. Pucker up for your lobotomy would also be a really good chapter title.
Harry, when the Dementor's kind of, getting ready to
consume his soul.
Souls, there's two there. He hears his mother's voice, and he's worried that like the last thing he'll ever hear is his mother screaming, which traumatic. This book, oh my god,
deeply, deeply traumatic. Yeah.
But then he sees something, and there's another person. He kind of says like, oh, there's another person across the lake, and he's like has a Patronus that's like
better than Harry's failed attempts at a Patronus.
But he's said that like he describes that he knows who it is, but he's like shocked by it, and we don't get the reveal to the next chapter. But we
don't need to spoil it.
And then he passes out. But things to think about. But obviously, Harry thinks that he sees his dad.
Spoiler alert!
Oh my god, this book came out in 1990, whatever.
What if people are not reading the book and they're only consuming it via this podcast? We don't want to spoil next chapter's big twist.
Why would you do that?
Okay, you go.
Basically, there was an old fan theory that I didn't know because obviously I was like 10 when I read this book. And actually, I was like, I think even younger when it first came out. But there apparently was a fan theory that James Potter survived. And this was like connected to this book where like there was theories that like even after they kind of explain like why Harry saw what he saw, there was theories for a bit that's like, oh, James Potter survived. And he's here.
Ooh.
And he's following Harry. I can't really find much information about it because I was trying to look up where I maybe would have read it back in the day, probably on MuggleNet, but I couldn't find much on it. But
I don't know if I would have liked that I feel like Harry's parents dying hits in a certain way.
It's kind of tropey.
It's pretty tropey, but also I think like it's easier for me to like it's sad that James died, and because I'm never going to have to meet him, it's easier for me to be more sad about his death, but I think I would find James Potter to be an asshole. And I feel like him being dead and me not having to know what he's actually like as a person makes it easier for me to feel more sympathy for Harry in that way of like he lost his parents and they were wonderful parents. Like I feel like if James Potter was written consistent with the middle ground between how he's described by people, I think like I wouldn't like him. And I think having him would ruin a lot of Harry's character growth because he has to become a person by like hodgepodging different parts of different adults in his life.
Having parents come back is usually kind of weird. Like, I think when I think about this, I think of the 100, where like the first season was all the kids, grounded. And then when the parents came in like the next season, it kind of ruined it because there's the idea that like when kids are like orphaned or just like doing things themselves, parents are kind of inconvenient to the story because generally parents should be stopping all the crazy things these kids are doing. But
Yeah, and also like even like I know in the show Supernatural when their dad came back to life or came back from I don't remember, they did a lot of weird stuff, but like people were like, oh, this no, like the dynamic is the brothers and like the older brother being kind of like the father figure, and like it completely ruins the dynamic to suddenly have like no, this is the default authority figure, completely changes like the ability of younger characters to interact with each other and like negotiate from like sort of equal footing when there's an automatic set authority figure. And I think the thing with Harry is that the adult he becomes as he ages is a little bit based on the personalities of the father figures in his life. And I guess some of the mother figures too, but like he hodgepodges himself into a grown up by finding different traits he sees as desirable in adults from the different people around him. And I think if his father was still alive, he would sort of he would put all of his like okay you're my father figure back into his father and he would become sort of just like a little bit of a James with a bit of a Hermione and Ron are my friends like personality difference. And I think he becomes a better person for having a multitude of father figures in the story and being able to sort of pick and choose which ones he inherits which traits from.
yeah, generally, like even though dead parents is a big trope too, like it feels weird when like these like teen dystopian novel characters are trying to do their chosen one things, and then their parents are just there, being parents.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine how like an actual living parent would handle it. Like when we find out Harry is the only one that can defeat Voldemort. Like parents are already pretty skewed and biased for their child, but like is his father like a well, Harry, this is your responsibility, go save the world, or is he like a no, Harry is my child, he's not going out to fight a evil dark lord, he knows two spells, you know?
Yeah, I think it also kind of explains like why like I think in Goblet of Fire 2, like they're very much clearly like Cedric's dead, he's dead, he's dead, he's not coming back. And I feel like they also kind of like shows like in this series that when characters die, they're like, dead. Like Sirius, there's also theories when Sirius dies that like he could come back from the veil, but we're like no, when he's dead. And I think that's kind of to establish.
Yeah. The only way to stay alive is certain preparatory steps that are done before you die. If you die and you haven't done the Horcruxes or all those special things, you're just dead. You should have had the forethought to create a Horcrux.
Yeah, I feel like the series kind of really shows that like when people die, they're like really dead. There's no like magic to bring you back because there's always going to be theories, but like, oh, what if they survived or what if they did this? Like when Dumbledore died, or like no, he's dead.
He's quite dead. Yeah, I like that it's finite. I like that characters die and stay dead because once you realize you're involved in a series where characters can come back from the dead all the time, it's kind of like harder to be as emotionally invested because you're like, oh, they could bring him back in the next book. Like I kind of feel like the only literature I've read where a character like kind of dies and comes back to life and it's good is The Lord of the Rings. And like that's not just like, oops, Gandalf died but came back like better. He's a Maiar. He's basically a demigod. Like he doesn't play by these rules. He didn't really, but like that's a whole other thing with enough lore to make it make sense. And because in the actual like Fellowship of the Ring, he's the only one that has that standing. So like no one else has that ability. It's not like everybody can just come back. It's just he's special and it's justified enough in the lore that it's okay. And it does not change the feelings of validity or severity or the repercussions of death for any of the other characters. Everyone else can just die.
But you have some psych babble that you have here that I missed.
Oh, I did. Yes, I have. It's a short chapter, readers. It's like 3 pages. So I was like, we need some like conversation points. So I'm coming in strong with the psych babble.
Dusting off your BA in psychology.
Dusting off. It's somewhere with my old coloring books in a bench somewhere. Anyhow, so one of the interesting things that we talk about a lot is how traumatized Harry is. But I think we get a really interesting example of Harry's trauma in this chapter because we never get to see him coping with the fact that he does watch Sirius have his soul sucked out of him. he sees the Dementors kiss Sirius, and then he also feels the Dementors trying to do the same to him. And like, we forget that it's a thing that happened because they travel back in time and we don't have to deal with those consequences. But that's not how the mind, the body, trauma, and memory work. So Harry witnessed and experienced and then encoded the memory of this experience in the context that the events occurring are definite and that the results are permanent. So what his body goes through, the physical reaction to seeing something like that, and like the triggers it'll cause in the future for you when you are in similar situations or when you remember this, are already encoded in him. And so he can't sort of relearn those memories after he goes back in time and saves Sirius, because he already went through it and his body already experienced it. And because he can remember having seen it happen, it's still there with him. There's things like the traumatic false memory, which is a psychological concept, which is just like, if you experience something traumatizing that you think is real and you find out it isn't. This is sort of like one of the things people talk about who go into those super terrifying haunted houses, or even like super inappropriate pranks that go too far. If you think something is real when it's happening, you are traumatized by it. Even if afterwards everyone's laughing and joking and ha ha ha, nobody really died, it was all a big joke. It's your body still keeps that false memories, like you still went through that whole thing and you're still going to remember going through it and keep all that trauma regardless of the outcome. And there's also things like the primacy effect, where like sometimes the thing you see first is the way you remember it, regardless of if you learn later that it was incorrect. This is something that comes up in school a lot, like, because sometimes teachers will introduce a concept like, so everybody knows that the proper answer to this equation is this, right? Actually, wrong. And then the teacher goes on to explain the right thing. Your brain is still might be likely to remember the first one because you're expecting to be given truth. You learned it as truth. You can't unremember that. That's how you encoded it. You encoded it as factual truth. And that's there. And people don't think about that with Harry. So he went through this, and even when Sirius is fine, he still watched Sirius. I mean, it's kind of like dying because you're not yourself anymore. He pretty much watched Sirius die, and he himself sat there next to him almost being killed. And like, nobody ever takes time to talk about that with Harry.
Maybe that's kind of why he's so reluctant to accept that Sirius did die in Order of the Phoenix.
Absolutely.
Because he's like, Sirius already like died, but then didn't. So like, this can't be true.
He already mourned Sirius in his, like, he watched Sirius die. He thought, okay, Sirius is gone. This is it. I just met him and he's gone. And then to lose him again, he's like, no, he has to go. Absolutely, it makes sense for why it led him to believe that Sirius had to have a way of coming back, because he had already been through that. And it's just such a thing that like nobody takes time to think about at all. That's kind of one of the bigger, like, he goes through so much, but this is one of the ones that just like could completely skew how he looks at any new friendship. Like, I just met a new person who's good, gonna be good, and I'm gonna love them, but last time this happened they died, you know. Nobody can offer to let me live with them ever again, because last time someone offered to let me live with them, they immediately had their soul sucked out of them. And that's just like, especially when you're younger, you're going to jump to those conclusions and maybe see patterns that aren't necessarily true. What if Ron's like, Harry, we're done Hogwarts, going out into the world as adults, let's get an apartment together. And Harry's like, Ron, you're gonna die. You know, there are repercussions.
Yeah, everyone needs therapy. But just before we wrap up, we kind of talked about this in little bits and pieces, but generally the idea here is that what would have happened if Sirius was cleared in Prisoner of Azkaban? Because, say, Lupin didn't transform, they go to Dumbledore, like they had Peter, so everything, he gets cleared. What would happen? How would it affect the series afterwards? Because obviously in Goblet of Fire, when Peter escapes, he's the one that finds Voldemort and like kind of brings him back to health and kind of helps him get his power back. And if Peter doesn't do that, then that kind of either slows down or changes the events of Goblet of Fire.
Yeah, we sort of talked about it from the perspective of Sirius and Harry's relationship, but we didn't talk about it much from the perspective of like, what does Peter Pettigrew getting away change for like the timeline and for Voldemort's resurrection, I guess. I mean, I think it would slow it down. I don't think Voldemort needed Peter. I think he has enough followers that it might have taken a bit more time for Voldemort to become a bit more like sentient and like embodied, and then he would have to find a way to reach out to one of his followers. But I'm certain there are a lot of people involved in the Death Eater organization who would want him back.
Yeah. Peter was convenient.
Yeah, Peter was probably the easiest to manipulate, but I think he has a lot of other people who would have done similar things for him.
Yeah, I'm sure if he got stronger, it would have taken longer.
Yeah. It would be interesting to see how, like, because Harry's, like, what he learns in school often very conveniently lines up with what he needs to know to, like, defeat that year's Voldemort issue. So it would be interesting to see if, like, Harry was a year ahead from a learning standpoint and a development standpoint and, like, a social interaction standpoint, how that would implicate things, because that means, like, when Voldemort comes back in the Battle of Hogwarts, he would have completed his 7th year at Hogwarts, you know? Instead of going camping in the woods.
And that's also the idea, because I always think that Voldemort would have tried to lure Harry to the Ministry, but if we didn't have Sirius in prison, Sirius would be around more and probably maybe wouldn't be as reckless, because we know Sirius in Order of Phoenix is very, like, reckless because he's cooped up and he's not doing stuff. But obviously, if he was cleared, he would be out doing things. So he'd probably be a bit more.
And also, I'm sure if he were Harry's parental supervision, Harry's guardian, I guess, I feel like Lupin or someone who has sensibilities would sit him down and talk to him about, like, now you like to do dumb things that almost get you killed. And that was fine before, but now you have a child at home that can't feed itself. So you need to not put yourself in so many situations that could get you killed.
I think Sirius will be a bit lighter and a bit more, I don't know if I say responsible, but a bit more, like, aware of, like, what he has now, that he doesn't have to worry about being on the run. He doesn't have to worry about, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think Sirius will be, like, because he's actually not on the run and, you know, and not in jail, and he's, like, able to go out and do things for the Order that would eventually start up, that he'd be a bit more centered, I think, and especially having Lupin there too. Won't be as, like, you know.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways to lure Harry into doing things, because Harry is kind of a child. So I feel like if he couldn't get Sirius to the Ministry to have Harry have a vision and trap Harry there, he could do it to Arthur Weasley. He could do it to any number of people that have legitimate reasons to be at the Ministry anyway.
Yeah, I definitely think that would always happen. But it's just kind of like, would Sirius die at or would he just die in battle? I think Sirius always had to die. I feel like it was just, like, in the story.
Yeah, he's too reckless, and he's too, like, I couldn't imagine.
It's too essential for the plot for Harry to lose another connection to his father. It's just, like, it needs to happen.
And it's true to the character. Like, there's no way that battle at the Ministry happens where somebody else was used as bait. Sirius finds out the Order is going to rescue Harry and doesn't come along. Like, you'd have to physically restrain him, you know?
I feel like Sirius is always meant to die, just in his character. So he's going to die in battle some way. So even if it wasn't in book 5, it probably would have happened at some point in some battle. Yeah, do you have any final remarks for this short chapter before we wrap up?
Final remarks. I guess Snape didn't even suck in this chapter, first of all. Point 1, Snape didn't suck.
He just gets 0 suck points for this chapter, but my final remarks are, Harry's just, like, a very traumatized kid, and he just would do anything to leave the Dursleys at this point.
Literally.
Yeah, Harry's just that kid. It's a miracle he didn't get kidnapped when living with the Dursleys. Probably would have been, like, going into any stranger's car being like, hey!
Will you be my mommy?
Thanks for listening to this episode of Potter Revisited, and we'll be back next time to discuss chapter 21 of Prisoner of Azkaban, Hermione's Secret.
Expose.
All shall be exposed, finally. Let us know your thoughts about this episode on our social media at Potter Revisited, or you can email us at potterrevisitedpodcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you next time.
Bye!